The Nuwaubian Nation of Moors is one of the strangest, most convoluted cults to ever emerge in America. What started as an obscure religious movement quickly descended into a twisted empire of control, exploitation, and horror. And at the center of it all, a man who claimed to be a god, but turned out to be a monster. Dwight York, later known as Malachi Z. York, was born in 1945 in Boston, Massachusetts, though he frequently fabricated details about his origins. By the late 1960s, he began his path as a religious leader, starting with an Islamic sect in Brooklyn. But York wasn't just another preacher, he was a chameleon, an opportunist who adapted his teachings to whatever would tighten his grip on his followers. In the 1970s, his group evolved into the Ansar, pure Sufi sect, pushing black Islamic teachings. Then, in the 1980s, he shifted gears entirely, infusing his doctrine with elements of Egyptian mysticism, and rebranding his followers as the Nuwaubian Nation of Moors. York's teachings became increasingly bizarre. He declared himself an extraterrestrial from the planet Rizq, sent to Earth to prepare his followers for an apocalyptic exodus. His books, thousands of them, contained contradictory pseudoscientific nonsense, weaving together ufology, numerology, ancient Egypt, and black supremacy. Some of his most outlandish claims included that certain individuals were born with reptilian DNA, that the world was controlled by shape-shifting beings, and that women who had multiple sex partners in a lifetime would be reincarnated as men in the next. But while his doctrine seemed like a chaotic mess, it served one purpose: to keep his followers confused, compliant, and utterly dependent on him. By the 1990s, York had moved his operation to Eatonton, Georgia, where he built an enormous compound called Tama Re. The land was transformed into a surreal Egyptian fantasy, complete with pyramids, obelisks, and sphinx statues. The compound, covering over 476 acres, housed not only his followers but also strict laws of behavior. York dictated every aspect of their lives, from what foods they could eat to the way they spoke and interacted with the outside world. The followers were convinced that York had supernatural abilities and that he was a divine being sent to guide them to salvation. York controlled everything: who his followers married, how they dressed, what they ate, even who they could speak to. Dissent was met with exile or worse. He filled their heads with apocalyptic warnings, telling them that government agents, demonic forces, and reptilian shapeshifters were plotting against them. He even claimed that the government had hidden knowledge of an underground alien civilization beneath Georgia. But the true horror of the Nuwaubian nation wasn't just in its doctrine, it was in what happened behind closed doors. In 2002, the walls of York's empire came crashing down. Federal agents raided Tama Re after receiving reports of child sexual abuse, financial crimes, and human trafficking. The details that emerged were horrific. York had built an underground network of child exploitation, grooming young girls within the cult, forcing them into sexual servitude under the guise of religious obedience. Survivors later testified that he had assaulted children as young as 4 years old. Some reports estimated that over 100 children had been sexually assaulted within the compound. Court testimonies revealed that York had a private area where he would summon his victims, disguised as religious teachings. He manipulated his followers into believing that sexual acts with him were divine initiations, and any resistance was met with severe punishment or exile from the group. Witnesses spoke of children being transported across state lines for his abuse, an act that would later be crucial in securing his conviction. But York's crimes weren't limited to sexual abuse. He had built a mafia-style operation, laundering money, defrauding his own followers, and stockpiling illegal weapons. He had turned his cult into a criminal enterprise, all while preaching about divine wisdom and extraterrestrial salvation. Reports surfaced that York had also engaged in arms smuggling and that his compound had a stockpile of semi-automatic weapons. He had convinced his followers that an impending government attack was inevitable, using fear tactics to keep them under his control. In 2004, York was sentenced to 135 years in prison for his crimes. The trial exposed the true nature of his rule, one built on absolute power, fear, and manipulation. The prosecution called 45 witnesses, including 14 victims who provided chilling testimonies of York's predatory behavior. Despite the overwhelming evidence, some Nuwaubians still believe he was framed, convinced that he was the victim of a government conspiracy. Even behind bars, his influence lingers, a testament to how deep cult programming can run. The fall of the Nuwaubian Nation of Moors led to the eventual demolition of the Tama-Re compound in 2005. The once magnificent Egyptian-style structures were bulldozed to the ground, erasing the physical remnants of York's empire. However, his teachings continue to spread online, where remnants of the group still promote his ideologies under different names and disguises. The Nuwaubian Nation of Moors may not have been a cult of ritual murder, but it was a cult of psychological and physical destruction. The children who suffered under York's rule were robbed of their innocence, their voices silenced for years. The manipulation of adults, the financial ruin of families, and the psychological scars left on former members prove that his damage extended far beyond the walls of Tama-Re. And the full extent of his crimes? We may never know. Because in cults like these, silence isn't just a survival mechanism, it's enforced, and many victims are still too afraid to speak. If you think this is just history, think again. Cults don't die with their leaders. They evolve, they rebrand, and they continue to lure in the vulnerable. The question isn't whether another cult like this will rise. It's whether we'll see it coming before it's too late.